While there is a long list of great tennis players, in the men's game one stands out, at least at the time of recording. The four biggest tournaments, the Grand Slams, are the Australian Open, the French Open, the Wimbledon Championships, and the US Open. Since the modern age of tennis began, only one man has won all four of the annual events in the calendar year. That was done in 1969 by the Australian Rod Laver. This wasn't even the first time Laver had done this, winning all Grand Slams in 1962. Laver was around at a pivotal turning point for tennis, through a battle between amateurism and professionalism. It was a battle that Laver would eventually win. His record doesn't seem that impressive from the modern understanding, but put his record in full context, and it stands up with many of the more recent greats of the sport. Welcome to the story of the man who won the calendar tennis Grand Slam as an amateur and as a professional. That's of Rod Laver, the only tennis player, male or female, to win the calendar Grand Slam, not once, but twice. Yet either side of those calendar Grand Slams was a time of great trial and tribulation, isolation, and quite frankly rejection from the higher-ups in the tennis community. Laver wanted to make his and his family's lives better, but it came at a great cost. Nevertheless, it was worth it, and when you study his career, there is good reason why so many of the 21st century champions speak so highly of this legendary figure in the Australian sporting landscape. Laver was born on the 9th of August 1938 in the rural town of Rockhampton. His father, Roy, was a cattle rancher, and his mother, Melba, a proficient tennis player herself, who met her husband at a tournament in the Queensland town of Dingo. With a backstory like that, it'll be no surprise to learn that tennis became the fabric of the Laver household. There was always a tennis court located near their home, and the young Rod began playing at age 6. At age 13, he lost to his brother Bob in the Central Queensland Junior Final. Shortly after, Laver was selected to attend a tennis camp sponsored by the Courier Mail newspaper and was run by a noted player-turned-coach, Harry Hopman. Hopman would have a considerable impact on a young Laver. Following the clinics, the Courier Mail ran the story, Hopman praises local tennis player, has high hopes for Rod Laver. Hopman wrote that Laver was the, quote, most promising boy in the Courier Mail coaching class, and I forecast a high place in Australian tennis for him in several years' time, unquote. In 1953, Laver left school to pursue his tennis career full-time, and by 1956, the hard work paid off when he won the 1956 US Junior Championship. That year was the start of his amateur career. He played in every Grand Slam that year, losing in the first round. Before I go anywhere, it's important to remember, Laver played almost entirely before the introduction of the tiebreaker. Historically, tennis sets needed to be won by 2 clear games. Nowadays, at 6-6, a tiebreaker is played, but that wasn't introduced at a slam until the 1970 US Open, and didn't become standard until 1975. The creation and introduction of the tiebreaker might very well get its own video someday, but keep in mind some of the insane set scores in matches were not unheard of in this era. It's also important to remember at the time the Australian and US majors were played on grass and not on hard courts. Back to Laver. At the 1958 Australian Championships, Laver won his first match at a Grand Slam, a 3-1 victory over fellow Aussie Fred Stoll. He lost 3-1 in the second round against American Michael Green. Later that year, at the 1958 US National Championships, he made his best run at a slam to this point in his career, making the 4th round. This time was a grind for Laver. He needed that stage experience before he could do what he would do later down the line. In his first 4 years as a junior, between 1956 and 1959, he won just 7 titles. The next 4 years saw a major shift. This could be seen in 1959. He played for Australia in the Davis Cup for the first time, and despite losing his 2 singles matches, Australia beat the USA 3-2 to take the glory. Laver got to the quarterfinals at the US and the final at Wimbledon in the singles. In the doubles, he won the 1959 Australian Championships men's doubles with Bob Mark and the mixed doubles with Darlene Hard. At the 1960 Australian Championships, Laver got through his first 3 matches fairly comfortably, only dropping the 1 set. His semi-final and final would be a much more difficult task. Against Roy Emerson, Laver pulled out a 5-set win, including 7-5 in the last set. In the final, despite dropping the first 2 sets against Neil Fraser, Laver would bounce back, winning the 3rd set 6-3, and the 4th and the final set 8-6 to claim his first Grand Slam title. A third-round exit at Roland Garros would be followed by defeats in finals in England and America. At Wimbledon, it was 3-1, and in the US, it was in straight sets against Fraser. He and Hard did defend their mixed doubles title at Wimbledon, though. His defence of the Australian Championships in 1961 looked very promising. From the last 32 to the final, he did not drop a single set. He even got further rest after his quarter-final opponent, Ken Fletcher, was forced to retire halfway through the second set. In the final against Emerson, the streak continued with a thumping first set performance, which he won 6-1. At this point, Laver had won 11 full sets he had played in during the tournament, but Emerson rallied, winning the next 3 sets to claim the title. That first set of the final being the only set Emerson dropped all tournament. After exiting at the semi-final stage at Roland Garros, Laver would go one better than 1959 and 1960 at Wimbledon 1961. Laver had to be resilient, being pushed to a 5th set in his second and third round matches. Outside of that, Laver did not drop a set across the tournament. It took him just 55 minutes to defeat Chuck McKinley in straight sets to win Wimbledon for the first time, after losing in the final the last 2 years. That Wimbledon win, and another big run in the US, losing in the final, paved the way for 1962. At the time, it had been 24 years since any man had won all 4 Grand Slams in a calendar year. Don Budge had done that in 1938. That's before the Second World War. In Australia, Laver only dropped a couple of sets before making the final, though he did have to battle his way through an 18-16 set in his third round win against Jeffrey Pears. He defeated Emerson in the final in 4 sets. The only set he dropped all tournament was the second, which was Love 6. In France, Laver was pushed like never before. A straight set win was followed by a couple of 4-setters, and then 3 straight matches that went to a 5th set. He came from 2-1 down to beat Matty Mulligan in the quarters before beating Neil Fraser to get to the final. He dropped the first 2 sets against Emerson, but rallied, and after winning the 4-set 9-7, he had all the momentum and won the last set 6-2 to claim the French championship. At Wimbledon, all was going smoothly to get to the quarterfinals outside of securing his 4th round match with a 13-11 set. In his quarterfinal, despite dropping the first set 14-16 against Manuel Santana, Laver would win the following sets 9-7, 6-2, 6-2 to make the semis. After a straight sets win in the semis against Fraser, it was once again straight sets in the final, defeating Mulligan 6-2, 6-2, 6-1. So Laver headed to America, looking to claim all 4 majors. He got to the final, only dropping a set once to get there. Once again, it was to be a final against Emerson, and Laver clinched the Grand Slam on September the 1st, 1962, 6-2, 6-4, 5-7, 6-4. Quote, "It was a thrill to come off the court, knowing I'd won all 4 majors in 1 year. But I never felt like I was the best. Never felt that way. I just happened to have a good year," unquote. Laver had a great 1962, and it would pave the way for his controversial next move. Having won everything he could on the amateur tour, Laver went pro. His decision to go professional was understandable. He was very disappointed that his hard-working parents weren't able to go and watch him play at Wimbledon. Going pro would allow him not only to set himself up for life after tennis, but also provide his parents with a comfortable retirement. Rod went on fishing trips off the North Queensland coast with his father and brothers Bob and Trevor, who gave him their blessing to make the switch. It didn't come without a cost. Amateur tennis officials banned him, as they had with all other players who turned professional. Wimbledon went even further, withdrawing him from their honorary membership. According to his book, The Golden Era, Laver said at the time they wouldn't even let him wear his Wimbledon tie. I was inspired to do a video on Rod Laver, in large part due to Kevin Sheedy's excellent book, Icons of Sport, which dedicates a chapter to Laver. Sheedy discusses this with regards to his own career. He had the desire to leave the Victorian Football Association and prove himself in the superior Victorian Football League. He wished to push himself at a high level, yet Sheedy and others were totally banned from playing anywhere in Australia for 5 years if they didn't make it in the VFL. It was a classic case of officials not understanding the talent of the arena. Laver listened intently to Jack Kramer, the promoter of the professional scene, and signed a reported $100,000 contract. I won Wimbledon in 1961 and 1962 and got a £15 voucher and a firm handshake. I just wanted the chance to play against the best players in the world, and that's why I turned pro. Plus, the financial enumerations were an important part of tennis back in those days, Laver said. So, starting in 1963, Laver was banned from playing at the Slams and even the Davis Cup. That was a tournament Laver had been strong in, guiding Australia to to victory 4 years in a row from 1959 to 1962. However, there were big events in the professional tour. In the early era of professional tennis, the usual format saw a series of two-man, one-night events across the US and other countries. Laver would be involved in the last of these matches with Ken Rosewall in 1963. But in addition to these head-to-head tours, there were pro majors. These three were held in the US, France, and England. Sound familiar? They were the US Pro Tennis Championship, the French Pro Championship, and Wembley Pro Championship. While this wasn't really considered so at the time, retrospectively, these three events have been remembered as the professional Grand Slam. The US event was held on grass, but the French and Wembley events were held on wood and held indoors. Rosewall was the greatest in this space, winning 15 pro majors, but Laver would get 8 in his own right. Most notably, in 1967, he won all 3 of these majors. Laver defeated Andreas Di-Mauro at the French Championships, Rosewall at Wembley, and Di-Mauro again in the US in the final. Additionally, in 1967, Laver won an 8-player straight knockout pro tournament at Wimbledon. The Wimbledon World Lawn Tennis Professional Championships, also known as the Wimbledon Pro, was a men's tennis tournament held in August 1967. The tournament was sponsored and broadcast by the BBC to mark the invention of colour television. Laver beat Rosewall in the final 6-2, 6-2, 12-10. The following year, 1968, was the new beginning for the sport of tennis. Starting at that year's French Open, the Grand Slams would become open to professionals, and thus beginning the Open era. The beginning of the Open era was a milestone in tennis history and led to much better conditions for the professional players. People were now able to make a good living playing tennis. But what the Open era did more than anything else was launch tennis going forward and help it gain a surge in popularity. It was undoubtedly instrumental in the foundation of the ATP and WTA in the following decade and ensuring they had the resources for their fully fledged out tours. They certainly helped out the slams. Ironically, the events with the most resentment to professional players would benefit the most from having them compete, as the Grand Slams quickly and steadily became among the biggest annual sporting events in the world. Laver was certainly happy with this development. It was a great feeling to be able to all compete again. Maybe a light shone down on me. That said, you're in this game for a reason, so compete hard and play hard. I think that showed up in 1969. Laver turned 30 in August of 1968, so he really didn't have many opportunities left to play the slams. He would enter the first 7 open-era Grand Slam tournaments, which was not something many of his peers were doing at the time. Australia was still too far away for many. Rosewall defeated Laver in the first men's singles Grand Slam final of the Open era, with a 6-3, 6-1, 2-6, 6-2 win in the French Open final, but he would go one better at Wimbledon. The tournament was a breeze early. 3 of his first 4 matches were won in 4 sets. Dennis Ralston forced a deciding set in the quarterfinal, which Laver got through. The semi-final and final were much easier. A straight set win over Arthur Ashe set up an all-Aussie final against Tony Roach. Laver won 6-3, 6-4, 6-2 in an effort that was his second Wimbledon win in a row, if you count 2 things separated by an imposed 5-year absence a row. Despite a 4th-round exit at the US major, Laver was playing as good as he ever had. 1969 would prove to be his greatest year. The 1969 Australian Open was held in Brisbane, and Laver had a strong couple of matches, though winning the last set of his 3rd-round match, 9-7, was the sign of what was to come. While Laver beat Fred Stoll in straight sets to make the semis, he had to battle through a whopping 18-16 second set, either side of 6-4 victories. You think 34 games is brutal? How about 42? That was how long the second set Laver and Roach played in their semi-final. Laver won 22-20 to go 2 sets up, but lost the third 11-9. How on earth did they do it back then? There was far less importance in those days in sport with regards to nutrition and recovery. That would have been brutal. And in big events too, where the pressure is high, extraordinary. Laver had to battle through that semi, but he won. Wait for the score. 7-5, 22-20, 9-11, 1-6, 6-3. The match lasted 4 hours. So how does Laver do after playing a 70-game 5-set epic? Oh, he breezes through the final to claim the Australian major. First slam, done. Back to Paris to try and do one better than last year. The first 4 rounds of the French were without drama for Laver. well, except one. He survived a scare going 2-0 down against Richard Cleary, an Aussie who would make the Australian Open final the following year. Despite dropping the first set in both his quarterfinal and semi-final, Laver made it to the French Open final again. Against Rosewell this year, there will be no denying Laver. 6-4, 6-3, 6-4, the French major, done. 2 majors down, there are 2 to go. The first 4 matches of Wimbledon 1969 for Laver very much mirrored his time in France. Premjit Lal of India put up a strong fight in the second round, winning the first 2 sets, but Laver won the 4th and 5th set 6-love. In the 4th round, Laver would be pushed again, this time by American Stanley Smith. Smith fought back from 2-love down to force a 5th set, but Laver pulled that one out to win in 5. Laver beat South African Cliff Drysdale in straight sets and Arthur Ashe in 4 sets to reach the final. His opponent was an Aussie, but not someone who's regularly faced him in finals all the way through this video so far. Rather, it was the 6th seed John Newcombe who beat the 2nd seed Roach in 4 sets to make the final. The final itself was a close affair, with Laver winning the first 6-4. The second 7-5 went to Newcombe. The next 2 sets were close, but Laver got the breaks he needed, winning both 6-4 to win Wimbledon yet again. After winning that Australian Open back at the start of the year, Laver learned his wife was pregnant and expecting around the time of the US Open final. But after winning Wimbledon, he was well and truly on fire. Leading into the US Open, Laver had won his last 23 matches. After winning the first 3 rounds, he would again find himself in yet another epic. It was Dennis Ralston from the United States who pushed him into a 5-set combat in the 4th round. After going 2-1 down, Laver rallied to win 6-4, 4-6, 4-6, 6-2, 6-3. In the semi-finals, Laver defeated Ashe, the defending champion, 8-6, 6-3, 14-12. So there is now only one man standing between him and the Grand Slam, and it's Tony Roach again. Laver said 50 years later, quote, "I wasn't afraid to lose, but I knew it was going to be a very tough match, so I had to put my best foot forward," unquote. Rain delays forced the match to be played on a Tuesday. The grass court was slippery, and Laver went down in the first set 7-9. He was allowed by the chair umpire to use spikes on his shoes. Given this was the last match of the tournament, there was no real concern about what it would do to the court. The spikes seemed to help. Laver won 3 sets on the bounce strongly by a score of 7-9, 6-1, 6-2, 6-2. Laver had done it again. A winner of the Grand Slam as an amateur, he had won it again as a professional in the first full year of the Open era. He had battled through some tough matches, but in each final he showed his class. In the post-match press conference, Rod Laver would tell the press that he was probably going to take a step back from tennis after achieving an amazing 2nd calendar Grand Slam. Quote, "I feel pretty happy, and that I hadn't been with my wife too often. I felt it was time that I needed to be with Mary and my child," unquote. His wife would give birth just 3 weeks later, allowing him to be by her side to meet their son. In the following years, Laver would focus mainly on the World Championship Tour, a rival organisation that would continue to help him in securing his and his family's future. There he would remain one of the best players until the mid-1970s. He would enter only 8 Grand Slam tournaments until his retirement in 1979, with the 1969 US Open remaining his last major victory. His last noteworthy run in a major was to the last 8 at Wimbledon in 1971. Laver has left quite the legacy on tennis. In 2000, the centre court at Melbourne Park, home of the Australian Open since 1988, became known as Rod Laver Arena. There is no doubt in my mind, had he competed at the Grand Slams in the year he was a professional before the Open era, he would have won at least 16 Grand Slams. To be honest, 20 seems very likely. Even more, perhaps, if it wasn't for injuries that hindered his career post-1969. It is impossible to know with 100% confidence, but his Grand Slam title record would likely be in rare air. Only the likes of Roger, Rafa, Novak on the men's side, Serena and Margaret on the women's side would be in his category. In my heart, he's a 19-time Grand Slam winner, counting the 8 pro majors. Before anyone scoffs at that, remember, we see this sort of thing in other sports. In darts, for example, Phil Taylor is considered a 16-time world champion. Raymond van Barneveld has 5, John Part 3, because we collectively count their world titles across 2 bodies. In boxing, you can call yourself a champion of the world, even if you're not undisputed, because guys have won a title in the same weight class, but with a different governing body. It should be noted Laver played in many more events outside of the majors and the Davis Cup. This is only an overview of the full Laver story, where wherever he went, he was one of, if not the man to beat. I focused on the slams because these are of course the money events, and even more so now, thanks to Laver and the Open era. But at the end of the day, the number is not that important. The legacy, respect and praise Laver gets from so many greats says more than anything else and shows how important of a character he truly is. Roger in particular has great affection for Laver, and in 2017 he established a team competition named the Laver Cup. What a champion he was, changing the face of tennis and being such an icon of Australian sport, all the while supporting his family and never forgetting where he came from. A true champion on and off the court.